The morning air in the Rocky Mountains was crisp and quiet when Lydia Harrington stood in the main hall of her retreat, arranging fresh wildflowers in a glass vase. Purple and white petals caught the sunlight coming through the tall windows, filling the room with a gentle warmth. This place was her peace. It was her refuge after a lifetime of being overlooked and taken for granted. At 61, Lydia had finally learned how to be still. Then she heard it. The low growl of an engine climbing the narrow mountain road. It cut through the silence like a warning. No one was scheduled to arrive that day. The women who lived at the retreat were all in town for their weekly counseling sessions. Lydia was alone, enjoying the rare calm that came between healing stories and shared meals. The engine grew louder. Through the window she saw a sleek black SUV pulling up near the front steps. Something in her chest tightened. She knew that car. She had not seen it in years, but her body remembered it. The doors slammed. Footsteps crossed the gravel. One slow and heavy, and sharp and impatient. Lydia did not need to look to know who it was. Logan Harrington, her son. And Vanessa, his wife. The doorbell rang. A soft chime that usually welcomed frightened women looking for safety now announced the two people who had caused her the deepest wounds. Lydia took a breath and opened the door. Logan stood there tall and polished with the same cold eyes he had inherited from his father. Vanessa stood beside him, flawless and tense, her designer bag hanging from her arm like a badge of status. "We heard you moved to a luxury place in the mountains," Vanessa said with a thin smile. "We came to live with you and make peace." Before Lydia could respond, Vanessa pushed past her and stepped inside. Logan rolled 2 large suitcases over the threshold without asking. "Do not just stand there, Mother," he said. "Help us with the bags." Lydia did not argue. She stepped aside. She wanted them to walk all the way in. She wanted them to see everything. They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. The air smelled of flowers and fresh bread, not money or marble. When they reached the main hall, they stopped. Both of them froze. Their eyes locked onto the large wall at the far end of the room, covered with dozens of framed photographs. Not family portraits. Not childhood memories. Something else entirely. Lydia stood behind them, watching their faces change. And that was when she knew everything was about to come out. Logan and Vanessa stared at the wall as if it did not make sense to them. Their reflections appeared faintly in the glass of the picture frames. Not a single image showed Logan as a child, not a single holiday table or birthday cake or smiling family portrait existed on that wall. Every face belonged to someone else. Lydia walked past them and stood in front of the photographs. "This place is not what you think it is," she said calmly. Vanessa folded her arms. "Then what is it supposed to be, Lydia? A hobby? A phase?" Lydia turned toward them slowly. "My whole life, people thought I existed to be useful," she said. "I raised a son alone after a hard marriage. I worked double shifts at the hospital. I paid bills and fixed problems, and smiled when no one asked how I was doing." Logan shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "When you stopped," Colin continued, "when every conversation became about what you needed from me, I finally understood something. I had spent decades being strong for people who did not value me. So I left. I did not come to the mountains for luxury. I came here to breathe." She gestured toward the wide-open windows where pine trees and distant peaks filled the horizon. "This is not a resort. It is a recovery retreat, a place where women who have been hurt and discarded can rebuild their lives." Vanessa laughed sharply. "You turned your life into a charity project." Lydia did not flinch. "I turned my life into something that matters." She looked back at the wall. "Those women you see there are not guests. They live here. They cooked together, they worked together, they healed together. They came here with nothing but fear and they learned how to stand again." Logan frowned. "You never told me about this." "You never asked," Lydia replied quietly. "For years you visited when it was convenient, you called when you needed something, you never once asked what I was building." Vanessa rolled her eyes. We thought you were finally enjoying yourself. I am, Lydia said, just not in the way you imagined. She took a slow breath. Everything you see in this building was paid for with my own savings. No investors, no sponsors, just years of work and sacrifice. Logan stared at her. Then why did Mrs. Chen say you were rich? Lydia almost smiled. Because people confuse peace with money. She turned back to the wall. And you have not even seen the most important part yet. Lydia stepped closer to the wall and gently touched one of the frames. This is Luna, she said. She arrived here 2 years ago with a baby and no place to sleep. Her family turned her away when she refused to go back to the man who hurt her. She moved her hand to the next photo. This is Margaret. Her own children took her retirement savings and left her in a nursing home she could not afford. She came here believing her life was over. Then another. And this is Helen. She spent 20 years as a school principal before her husband convinced her she was worthless. When she left him, she did not even know how to use her own bank account. Logan shook his head. What does any of this have to do with us? Everything, Lydia said. These women did not come here because they were weak. They came here because they were brave enough to start again. Vanessa scoffed. They look like a collection of problems. Lydia turned sharply. They are my daughters. The words settled into the room like a weight. Logan stared at her. What do you mean, daughters? You're not their mother. Lydia looked at him. I may not have given birth to them, but I chose them. And they chose me. She gestured toward the photos. They call me when they are afraid. They come to me when they have good news. They ask my advice when they feel lost. She lowered her voice. When was the last time you did that, Logan? He looked away. Vanessa crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. You are replacing your own family with strangers. Lydia shook her head slowly. I am not replacing anyone, I am building something real. She pointed at a photo of Luna smiling while holding her baby. That child has never gone to bed hungry since she came here. That woman now works at the local clinic and saves money for her own place. She pointed to Margaret in the garden. That woman grows food that feeds this entire community. Then to Helen teaching a group of younger women. That woman teaches others how to survive. They are not broken. They are rebuilding. Vanessa shook her head. You sound like you are running some kind of emotional cult. No, Lydia replied evenly. I am running a family that actually shows up for each other. She stepped closer to Logan. You are my son, but you walked away from me long before I walked away from you. And that is why this wall does not include you. Vanessa let out a short, bitter laugh. Though this is what you spent your money on, she said, a group of broken women who need you to feel important. Lydia did not raise her voice. They do not need me to feel important, she said. They need me because they are healing, and I need them because they remind me what love actually looks like. Logan stepped forward. You could have spent that money on something better, on something that helped your real family. Lydia met his eyes. These women are my real family. Vanessa waved toward the wall. They are damaged, abandoned, unstable. What kind of future do you think this creates? Lydia took a breath. Let me tell you something. Luna was 19 when she came here, pregnant, homeless, terrified. She now works full-time and studies at night. Margaret came here ready to give up on life. She now manages our finances and helps other women learn how to protect themselves. Ellen could not even write a check when she arrived. Now she runs our training programs. That is the future we create here. Logan looked uncomfortable. But that does not make them your daughters. It makes them family, Lydia said. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. So you would choose them over us? Lydia nodded. Every day. Logan raised his voice. You are letting these people use you. Lydia stepped closer. They do not use me. They contribute, they work, they give back, they respect me. She paused. You never did. The room went quiet. Logan opened his mouth but nothing came out. Vanessa scoffed. "You are being dramatic." "No," Lydia said calmly. "I am being honest. You come here after years of silence and judgment. You walk into my home and insult the people I love. You do not see them as humans. You see them as failures. That tells me everything." Logan looked away. "You never wanted this kind of life," Lydia continued. "You wanted status, comfort, control. But this place is built on something you do not understand. Dignity. Every woman here earns her place. They show up, they work, they heal. And they treat me like someone who matters." She turned toward the wall again. "That is why their faces are here. And yours is not?" Vanessa clenched her jaw. "You think you are better than us now?" "No," Lydia replied. "I think I am finally free." Lydia turned back toward Logan and studied his face. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Why are you really here?" Logan hesitated. Vanessa answered for him. "Business has been slow," she said quickly. "The market turned. Things got complicated." Lydia folded her arms. "Complicated means debt." Logan sighed. "Some." "How much?" Lydia asked. He swallowed. 53,000. Vanessa looked away. "Credit cards, business loans, we thought things would improve." Lydia nodded slowly. "And when you heard I bought property in the mountains, you assumed I was wealthy." Logan said nothing. "You thought you could move in," Lydia continued. "Live here while I took care of everything. Pretend it was about family." Vanessa snapped. "We just thought it made sense." "No," Lydia said, "you thought it was convenient." Logan looked at the floor. "We did not think it through." "You never do," Lydia replied. "You never ask, you assume." She took a slow breath. Do you know what the women here do when they need help?" "They ask." "They do not arrive with suitcases and expectations. They do not walk into someone else's life and demand space. They come here with honesty. 'I have nothing, I am afraid, I need help.' That is how healing begins." Vanessa scoffed. "We are not like them." "That is the problem," Lydia said. "You are not willing to admit when you are broken." Logan rubbed his face. "We thought you had more." "I have exactly what I need," Lydia replied. "And you came here to take it?" The silence between them grew heavy. Outside the window, Lydia saw women walking back from town laughing together. That was what Logan and Vanessa never understood. This place was not built on money. It was built on truth. Lydia took a step forward and spoke with calm clarity. "You have two options." Logan looked up. "What options?" "You can stay here," Lydia said, "but not as guests, not as entitled family. You will live the same way everyone else does. You will share a small cabin, you will help cook and clean, you will attend financial counseling, you will work in the garden or the workshop. You will rebuild your lives honestly." Vanessa stared at her. "You want me to scrub floors." "I want you to contribute," Lady replied. "This place is not a hotel, it is a community. No one here gets special treatment." Logan looked uncertain. "And if we say no?" "Then you leave," Lydia said. Vanessa laughed sharply. "You would throw out your own son?" "I would refuse to let anyone poison what I built," Lydia answered. She gestured around the room. "These women came here with nothing. They show up every day, they work for their future. You came here with debt and entitlement. If you stay, you earn your place. If you leave, you take responsibility for your choices." Logan looked at Vanessa. Vanessa's face showed pure disbelief. "This is insane," she said. "You are asking us to live like charity workers." "No," Lydia said, "I am asking you to live like adults. People here wake up at 6, they prepare meals together, they clean, they learn, they grow. No one is served, everyone contributes." Logan swallowed. "We just need time." "Time is not what you need," Lydia said. "You need humility." The room felt tight with tension. From outside, voices drifted closer. The women were returning. Lydia looked at Logan and Vanessa. Decide carefully. Because the moment those women walk through that door, you will see exactly what family looks like. The front door opened and the sound of voices filled the hall. Luna stepped inside carrying her young daughter on her hip. Her face lit up when she saw Lydia. "We brought fresh bread," she said happily. She stopped when she noticed Logan and Vanessa. "Oh, I am sorry," she said softly. "I did not know you had visitors." Logan barely looked at her. "So this is one of them," he muttered to Vanessa, "one of the burdens?" Luna froze. The word struck her like a slap. Lydia turned sharply. "Logan, stop." But he kept going. "Your mother has built her life around women who cannot even take care of themselves," he said. "It is pathetic." Luna pulled her child closer. That was when Margaret stepped in. At 70, she was small but strong. "You will not speak to her like that," she said firmly. Vanessa scoffed. "Who are you?" "Someone who belongs here," Margaret replied. Ellen joined them. "These women work harder than anyone you have ever known," she said. Logan laughed bitterly. "You are all just using my mother." Lydia stepped forward. "Now," she said quietly, "you are the one who came here expecting to be taken care of." Vanessa's face twisted with anger. "This place is crazy," she said. "You are surrounded by damaged people." Lydia looked around. "I am surrounded by survivors." She turned to Logan. "You just humiliated a young mother who has rebuilt her life from nothing. That tells me who you really are." Logan opened his mouth to argue, but Lydia raised her hand. "Enough." Her voice was steady. "You have shown me everything I needed to see." The women stood beside her, not speaking, not moving. Just present. That was the moment Logan and Vanessa realized they were no longer in control. Lydia looked at Logan and Vanessa one last time. "Get your bags," she said. Logan blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Lydia replied. "Leave now." Vanessa laughed nervously. "You cannot be serious." "I am," Lydia said. "You insulted the people I love. You walked into my home and treated it like something you could take. That ends here." Logan clenched his fists. "You are choosing them over me." "I am choosing respect," Lydia answered. "I am choosing peace. I am choosing the family that chose me back." Vanessa grabbed her purse. "You will regret this." Lydia shook her head. "No, I finally stopped regretting." Logan stared at the women standing around Lydia. "You think they will stay," he said. "They will leave you too." Lydia smiled gently. "They already stayed." They turned toward the door. The sound of their suitcases rolling away echoed through the hall. When the door closed behind them, the room felt lighter. Luna stepped closer to Lydia and took her hand. Margaret and Helen moved beside her. No one cheered. No one spoke. They did not need to. The storm had passed. And the family remained. 2 years passed. The mountain retreat that Lydia Harrington built with her own hands had grown beyond anything she imagined. There were now 12 small cabins instead of 6. The gardens stretched across the hillside, feeding not only the women who lived there but families in the nearby town. Luna was no longer the frightened young mother who arrived with nothing. She was a licensed nurse working at the local clinic. Her daughter ran through the grass, laughing without fear. Margaret managed the finances, teaching women how to protect themselves. Helen trained new residents, showing them how to rebuild their confidence. One morning, Lydia received a message. Logan. He wrote that he was in therapy, that his marriage had ended, that he finally understood what he lost. Lydia read it slowly. Then she deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of peace. She had built something that no one could take away. A real family. Later that day, a young woman arrived with a note from Luna. It said, "Tell Lydia Harrington thank you, she saved my life." Lydia welcomed her inside. The cycle continued. Healing created healing. Love created more love. The mountain air carried laughter across the property. And Lydia knew she had won in the only way that truly mattered. People think revenge means watching someone else suffer. But the real revenge is building a life they can never touch. Lydia Harrington learned that family is not who shares your blood. It is who stands with you when you are vulnerable. It is who respects your boundaries. It is who shows up without needing to take something. Logan and Vanessa came looking for money and control. They left with nothing. Lydia stayed with everything that mattered. Peace. Purpose. People who loved her for who she was. If this story moved you, then it probably touched something real. Because many of us know what it feels like to give everything to people who only take. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what would you have done in Lydia's place? Do not forget to like and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to The Art of Revenge for more stories about boundaries, strength, and quiet justice.
The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 3:07 a.m. in a dull red light that made the ceiling look stained with shadows. My throat felt dry and bitter, as if I had swallowed ash. I reached across the bed for the familiar warmth of my husband David, but my hand touched only cold sheets and empty space. Where did he go? I whispered to myself. David had been restless lately, always pacing, always checking his phone, always complaining about pressure at his construction company. I told myself he was just stressed, but something in my chest felt tight and wrong. I picked up my phone to open the living room security feed. Since we adopted our British short-hair cat, I had gotten used to checking cameras when I heard noises at night. My fingers slid across the screen, but instead of the living room, I accidentally opened the dash cam app for my new SUV. The screen lit up and showed our garage bathed in yellow light. And that is when my blood turned to ice. David was lying on his back under my car wearing gray sweats and rubber gloves. A small flashlight was clenched between his teeth. In his hand, he held a pair of steel wire cutters. He was not fumbling. He was precise. Every time the cutters closed, another brake line snapped. I covered my mouth to stop a scream. Tears burned down my face, but my heart felt frozen. The man who kissed me goodnight was destroying the one thing that kept me alive on the road. Then his phone rang. He took the flashlight from his mouth and answered on speaker, laying the phone on the concrete floor so he could keep working. A woman spoke. Her voice was sweet but sharp. "Honey, are you almost done? Our son is kicking again and I am so tired. That $5 million has to belong to him. Do not forget to clean everything when you finish." David laughed softly. "Do not worry, Lena. I am cutting the brake lines right now. Tomorrow Julia will be driving through the mountains. One sharp turn and it will all be over. Once she's gone, the money will be mine, and you and our boy will live in this house." The phone slipped from my hand onto the bed. $5 million. A son. A plan. The man I married was planning my death. I pulled the blanket over my face as my body shook. I bit my lip until I tasted blood just to keep myself quiet. That night, the woman who trusted her husband died, and someone else took her place. My name is Julia Reynolds, and until that night, I thought I had a normal marriage. I worked as a financial analyst in Richmond. My life was quiet, organized, and built on numbers and planning. David used to say he admired that about me. He said I was steady, reliable, the kind of woman a man could build a future with. 3 weeks earlier, that future changed. I received a call from a lawyer in Zurich telling me that my Aunt Helen had passed away. She had never married and never had children. I was the only family she had left. She left me $5 million. $5 million. When I told David, he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. He said this was our miracle, our new beginning. But after that day, I noticed something different in his eyes. It was not happiness. It was calculation. David owned a small construction company in Virginia. On the surface, it looked successful, but behind closed doors, it was drowning in debt. He had borrowed from private lenders. He had taken risks he could not cover. He never told me how bad it was until the inheritance arrived. Suddenly, he talked about joint accounts, about moving my money into his company, about how everything in a marriage should be shared. I told him I wanted to talk to my parents first. I wanted to invest carefully. That money was my safety, my future, the legacy of a woman who had loved me like a daughter. David smiled when I said that, but his smile did not reach his eyes. That is why I bought the new SUV. I planned to drive through the Blue Ridge Mountains to visit my parents and discuss how to protect the inheritance. It was supposed to be a safe trip, a simple road through green hills and quiet towns. I never imagined my husband was turning that car into a weapon. $5 million did not just change our bank account. changed the man sleeping beside me. I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling long after the dash cam feed went black. My body wanted to scream. My hands wanted to shake David awake and demand answers. But something deeper inside me went cold and clear. If I screamed, I would be dead. So I stayed silent. I carefully saved the video from the dash cam. Then I sent a copy to a secret email account I had created years earlier when I worked with fraud cases. I also copied it onto a small USB drive and hid it inside the lining of my makeup bag. Only then did I let myself breathe. I did not cry like a broken wife. I cried like someone who had just survived an ambush. I kept thinking about Lena and the child she mentioned, about the way David laughed when he said my life would end on a mountain road, about how easy it was for him to plan my death. In that moment, I understood something that every woman should know. Danger does not always come with raised voices. Sometimes it comes with kisses and coffee in the morning. When the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I stood up and went to the bathroom. I looked at my reflection. My face looked pale, but my eyes were different. They were awake. Tonight, the naive wife died. The woman in the mirror was someone else, someone who would survive, someone who would make sure the truth came out. When David came back into the bedroom an hour later, he slid under the covers like nothing had happened. He wrapped an arm around me and kissed my hair. "Sleep well," he whispered. I lay still, pretending to breathe slowly. In my mind, I was already planning my escape and his downfall. The morning sun filled our kitchen with a warm, golden light that felt cruelly out of place. Coffee steamed on the counter, fresh bagels sat on a plate. From the outside, our home looked peaceful. From the inside, it felt like a trap. David sat at the table reading the business section of the paper. When he saw me, he smiled and pulled out a chair. "Good morning, sweetheart. I got your favorite bagels. You should eat before you drive. The mountain roads are long and steep." I poured myself coffee and forced my hands not to shake. "You are always so thoughtful," I said. "Did you check the car properly yesterday? I just feel a little nervous about driving that far." For a fraction of a second, his eyes shifted away. Then he smiled again. "Of course I did. It is a brand new SUV. I even took it to the dealership. Everything is perfect. You have nothing to worry about. Nothing." The word made my stomach twist. I nodded and sat down across from him. I watched the man who had promised to protect me lie to my face as easily as he sipped his coffee. "You will be careful up there," he said softly. "Those curves can be dangerous." I wanted to laugh. He was not worried about curves. He was worried about me surviving them. I buttered a bagel slowly and took a bite. Every swallow felt heavy in my throat. I had never been so close to someone who wanted me dead. The doorbell rang suddenly, cutting through the tension. David looked relieved. "Saved by the bell," he said with a light chuckle. But I knew better. Something was coming, something that would decide who lived and who did not. The front door swung open, and Brooke Reynolds walked in like she owned the place. Her long blonde hair was messy, and her phone was already in her hand. Behind her was her boyfriend, a rough-looking man named Kyle, who smelled of cigarette smoke and trouble. Brooke did not even say hello. "Julia, we are taking your new SUV today," she said. "My car is in the shop, and Kyle promised his friends a mountain trip. We cannot show up in something old and embarrassing." Before I could answer, Margaret Reynolds came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Oh, let her take it, Julia," she said. "You are rich now. A car sitting in the garage will just go bad. Let Brooke enjoy it." David froze. I saw sweat form at his hairline. He knew that car was no longer just a car. It was a coffin on wheels. But he could not stop them. If he did, he would have to explain why. I pretended to hesitate. "But I was going to drive that car to see my parents today," I said. "It was just serviced." "I am not sure it is ready for a long trip yet." Brooke slammed her hand on the table. "Do not be cheap, Julia. Just because you got some inheritance, you think you are better than us now." Margaret turned on me. "Why are you being so difficult? She is your sister-in-law. Let her use the car." All eyes turned to David. "Say something," Margaret snapped. "Are you afraid of your wife?" David swallowed. For a moment I thought he might stop it, but pride won. He sighed and looked at me. "Just let her take it, Julia. It is just a car. Just a car." I slowly reached into my purse and took out the keys. I placed them on the marble counter. The sound of metal against stone was sharp and final. "Fine," I said quietly. "Just be careful, Brooke. That car has a lot of power." Brooke grabbed the keys with a grin. "Now that is more like it," she said. David reached out too late. Brooke and Kyle were already heading for the door. I watched them go, knowing exactly what those keys meant. They did not unlock a luxury vehicle. They unlocked the gates of hell. The roar of the SUV faded down the driveway and left behind a silence that felt thick and heavy. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every breath sound too loud. I sat on the sofa and picked up an apple from the bowl on the table. Slowly, I began to peel it in one long, thin strip. My hands were steady, even though my heart was not. David could not sit still. He paced from the window to the door and back again. He checked his phone, then the clock, then his phone again. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. "You look nervous," I said softly. "Brooke is a good driver. That car is full of safety features." He jumped. "I am just worried," he said quickly. "Those mountain roads are dangerous and she likes to speed." I watched him closely. He was not afraid for his sister. He was afraid the brakes would not fail when he needed them to. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. Each second felt like a slow drumbeat. 1 hour passed, then 2. The house felt like a waiting room for something terrible. David picked up his phone and put it down again, over and over. His hands shook. He was waiting for a call. And so was I. The phone finally rang. The sound was so loud in the quiet room that David flinched like he had been struck. He stared at the screen for a moment. An unknown number. His hand trembled as he answered. "Hello," he said. I watched his face as he listened. The color drained from his skin. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then the phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor. "No, no," he whispered. "That cannot be right." He collapsed to his knees as if his bones had suddenly turned to water. Tears poured down his face. Margaret rushed in from the hallway. "David, what happened?" she cried. He could not speak. I leaned down and picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "State Highway Patrol, Mom. There has been a serious accident involving a white SUV registered to your household. The vehicle experienced total brake failure while descending a mountain road. It went off the side of a ravine. The 2 people inside did not survive." Margaret screamed and fainted. David made a broken animal sound. I knelt beside him and whispered so only he could hear. "Was it supposed to be me, David?" His eyes snapped up to mine. In them I saw terror, like I had never seen before. "You know," he whispered. I stood up slowly. The truth was out. The plan had worked, just not the way he wanted. The county morgue was cold in a way that made my bones ache. The smell of disinfectant burned my nose as 2 metal tables stood under harsh white lights. White sheets covered what remained of Brooke and her boyfriend. David stood beside me, shaking so badly he could barely stay upright. His eyes were wide and hollow, as if he were looking into a nightmare he could not wake from. The medical examiner pulled back the first sheet. The body was burned and broken, but a small gold necklace with a clover charm still rested against blackened skin. "That is Brooke," David whispered. "I gave her that necklace last year." He fell to his knees and sobbed. I did not move. The examiner nodded and reached for a bag of personal items recovered from the wreck. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside was a scorched designer purse, melted makeup, a cracked phone, and a folded piece of paper. The examiner handed it to Margaret, who had just been helped into the room. It was an ultrasound image. 8 weeks. Pregnant. Margaret stared at the picture and let out a scream so raw it cut through the air. "My baby? My grandchild?" She collapsed to the floor. David looked like he was going to vomit. 2 lives gone, because he wanted money and a son. I stood there feeling nothing but a cold, heavy calm. This was only the beginning. The police station smelled of old coffee and paper. David sat beside me at a metal table, his hands shaking in his lap. A senior investigator leaned forward with a calm but sharp gaze. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "why was your sister-in-law driving your vehicle this morning?" I swallowed and spoke softly. "Brooke came to our house and demanded to borrow the SUV. I did not want to give it to her. I planned to use it myself. But David said I was being selfish. He insisted I give her the keys." The investigator turned to David. "Is that true?" David nodded weakly. "Yes," I continued. "A few days ago, I heard a strange clicking sound from under the car when I parked it in the garage. I wanted David to check it, but he said it was nothing. This morning I tried to mention it, but everything happened so fast," David snapped. "That is not true. You imagined it." The investigator raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Reynolds, why are you so upset?" David wiped sweat from his face. "Because she is confusing things. The car was new. There was nothing wrong with it." I looked down at my hands. I just wish I had insisted. If I had, maybe Brooke would still be alive. The investigator made notes. David did not realize it yet, but the trap was closing around him. That night, I sat alone in the guest room and finally allowed myself to breathe. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I called my father. "Dad," I said, my voice breaking. "David tried to kill me." There was a long silence. Then his voice turned hard. "I am coming." "Not yet," I said. "I need you to do something smarter. Call Mr. Adams, our family lawyer. I want every joint account frozen immediately." After I hung up, I called Mr. Adams myself. I explained everything in a low, steady voice. Within an hour, emergency papers were filed. David could not move a single dollar without being flagged. Then I checked the dashcam files again. 3 copies, 1 on the USB, 1 in my email, 1 in the cloud. Insurance. That video was my shield, and his end. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since 3 in the morning, I felt something close to control. Brooke's funeral was held 3 days later in a quiet white chapel outside of town. The air smelled of flowers and incense, and grief hung over the room like heavy fog. People whispered as they walked past the casket. A young woman dead in a new luxury car always made people curious. David stood beside me in a black suit, his face pale and tight. His eyes kept scanning the room as if he expected someone to shout the truth. Then the doors burst open. Margaret staggered inside, supported by 2 relatives. Her hair was loose, her face streaked with tears. "My daughter," she cried. "My baby." She rushed toward the casket and began beating the wood with her fists. "Someone killed her. A new car does not just fail." The room fell silent. I stepped forward. "Mom, please, she needs peace." Margaret turned on me. "You!" she screamed. "You gave her that car. You knew something was wrong. You wanted her dead." Before I could react, her hand struck my face. The sound echoed through the chapel. I fell to the floor in shock. David froze. I looked up at him, tears streaming. "David, tell her the truth. You told me to give Brooke the keys." All eyes turned to him. He grabbed his mother roughly. "Stop it," he hissed. "You are making a scene." His fear was louder than his grief. People began to whisper. The perfect brother was cracking. While everyone was distracted by the chaos in the chapel, I stepped quietly into a side hallway. I took out a second phone I had prepared days earlier and opened a photo. It was an ultrasound. The name at the bottom read, Lena Parker, 12 weeks. A boy. I typed a short message and sent it to Margaret's phone. "This is the child your son wanted. This is why Brooke died. $5 million for a firstborn son." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to my seat as if nothing had happened. A few minutes later, Margaret's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen. At first, her face was confused. Then it went blank. Her hand began to shake. The color drained from her cheeks. She looked up at David, not with grief, with horror. Everything she believed about her son collapsed in that moment. The son she worshipped had traded his sister for money and another woman child. Margaret did not scream. She did not cry. She just stared. Sometimes silence is louder than any accusation. That evening, David came home like a storm. His tie was loose. His eyes were red. He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. "Why are all my accounts frozen?" he shouted. "What did you do?" I sat on the couch, pretending to be afraid. "I do not know what you are talking about," I said. "Maybe the police did it because of the accident." He grabbed the edge of the table. "You think I am stupid?" "The bank said it was because of a marital dispute." "You did this." Margaret came down the stairs, slowly holding her phone. "David?" she said quietly. "Who is Lena?" He froze. "I told you to mind your own business," he snapped. She held up the ultrasound. "Who is this child?" David's face went white. "You have no right to that," he said. Margaret walked closer. "You killed my daughter. For this, David lost control. It was supposed to be Julia," he shouted. "Not Brooke. She was not meant to be in that car." The room went silent. I reached behind the vase and pressed a button on my phone. Recording. Margaret stumbled back. "What did you say?" David covered his mouth. Too late. He ran upstairs and slammed the door. The truth had finally come out. The next morning, the police arrived with calm, serious faces. David sat at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee like it held answers. Margaret had not slept. Her eyes were swollen and empty. An investigator placed a small black USB drive on the table. "Mrs. Reynolds, you mentioned hearing something under the car before the accident. We would like to see any recordings you may have." I nodded and handed them the USB. The screen came to life. There was David in the garage at 3 a.m. Gray sweats, rubber gloves, steel cutters. The sound of metal snapping filled the room. Then Lena voice played through the speakers talking about their son and the $5 million. Margaret covered her mouth. David stood up so fast his chair fell over. "Turn that off," he shouted. The investigator did not. David's voice came through the recording, calm and cold. "Once Julia is gone, the money will be mine." Margaret collapsed. David dropped to his knees. It was over. There was nowhere left to hide. The trial moved quickly once the evidence was public. There was nothing David's lawyer could say to explain a video of him cutting brake lines or a recording of him planning my death. He stood in court, thin and broken, as the judge read the verdict. 20 years. No parole for a long time. I did not feel happy. I felt finished. The divorce was granted the same week. Every account was reviewed. Every asset traced. Most of what David had once called ours was returned to me. The $5 million from my aunt was finally safe. I sold the house. Too many memories. I kept only my clothes, a few books, and my cat. Sometimes letting go is the strongest form of revenge. I walked away without looking back. 3 years passed like a long, quiet breath after a storm. I moved into a small apartment in the city with big windows and soft light. It was not as large as the old house, but it felt safe, and that mattered more than anything. I went back to work and slowly rebuilt my confidence. Numbers made sense again. So did mornings and evenings and weekends that belonged only to me. I invested part of my inheritance into a chain of organic food stores. It started with one small shop and grew from there. I learned how to trust my judgment again. I learned how to listen to that quiet inner voice that had tried to warn me before everything fell apart. Sometimes memories still visited me, not as nightmares, but as faded scenes from a film I once watched. David's voice, the garage, the sound of metal snapping. They no longer controlled me. One afternoon, I found a yellow envelope in my mailbox. The return address was a correctional facility. His name was on it. I did not open it. I fed it into my paper shredder and watched it turn into thin white strips. Whatever he wanted to say could stay with him. My life was no longer tied to his. I stood by my window that evening, watching the city lights come on one by one, and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. If there is one thing this story should leave you with, it is this. Your intuition is not fear, it is information. Julia did not survive because she was stronger than everyone else. She survived because she listened to the quiet warning in her chest and chose to act instead of panic. Most betrayals do not start with shouting. They start with small lies, with financial pressure, with someone slowly treating you like a resource instead of a person. If someone suddenly becomes obsessed with your money, your control, or your future, pay attention. Protect yourself. Document everything. And never ignore the feeling that tells you something is wrong. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video. It helps this channel reach more people who may need to hear these stories. Share it with someone you care about. And in the comments, tell me where you are watching from and whether you have ever trusted your intuition and been proven right. This is the art of revenge. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply surviving and taking your life back.
My name is Rachel Holloway, and the day my marriage officially ended was the same day my father was buried. Not at home. Not in a lawyer's office. But at my father's funeral. The church in Madison was quiet in that heavy way grief brings, the kind where even footsteps sound too loud. White lilies filled the air with a scent so strong it made my head ache. My father's casket sat at the front, polished and closed, the final proof that the one person who had always protected me was gone. I was still shaking from signing the guest book, from hugging relatives, from hearing people tell me how good a man my father had been. Then my husband, Evan Holloway, walked toward me with a man in a dark suit. "Rachel," Evan said softly, like he was doing me a favor. "This is my attorney. We need you to sign something." I remember looking at the folder in his hands and thinking how unreal it felt, like this was happening to someone else. "Right here," I whispered, "at my father's funeral." Evan leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for it to sound kind, but loud enough for others to hear. Your dad would want you to do the right thing. He would want honesty. He would want us to move on peacefully." The room went still. My aunt froze a few steps away. One of my father's co-workers stared openly. Everyone was watching me now. I looked down at the papers. Divorce documents. His name as the petitioner. Mine as the respondent. Legal language about irreconcilable differences and asset division. I felt small, cornered, exposed. I had lost my father less than 6 hours earlier. I was exhausted, numb, surrounded by people who expected me to behave, to be polite, to not cause a scene. So I did exactly what Evan thought I would do. I picked up the pen. "Okay," I said quietly, "I'll sign." What Evan did not know was this. 2 hours earlier in a law office downtown, I had already signed something else. And that was the moment his life quietly fell apart. 3 days before my father's funeral, my life looked ordinary from the outside. I had been married to Evan Holloway for 8 years. We lived in a modest rental house on the east side of Madison, the kind with thin walls and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of old coffee. Nothing fancy, nothing permanent. I worked full-time at a regional hospital, handling medical billing and insurance claims. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Every month my paycheck covered the rent, groceries, utilities, car insurance, and whatever Evan needed for his latest idea. Evan, on the other hand, was always on the edge of something big. He never said unemployed. He said building. He said networking. He said preparing investor decks and waiting on the right opportunity. For years I believed him, or maybe I wanted to. Most mornings I woke up before sunrise to get ready for work while Evan slept in. He claimed his calls ran late into the night. Sometimes he came home after midnight. Sometimes he didn't come home at all and blamed hotel Wi-Fi or crashing at a friend's place. When money got tight, Evan always had an explanation. "Once the funding comes through, this won't matter. You just don't see the bigger picture yet. You have to trust me." I trusted him because that's what wives are taught to do. I packed my own lunches to save money. I skipped new clothes. I told myself sacrifice was temporary and love meant patience. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Bills I never remembered opening. Packages that arrived and disappeared. An expensive cologne Evan said was too special for everyday use. But when you are busy surviving, you don't question patterns, you normalize them. I thought my marriage was struggling because life was hard. I didn't realize it was struggling because I was married to someone who saw me as a resource, not a partner. And I had no idea how close everything was to collapsing. The first real crack appeared on a Monday afternoon at work. I was sitting in my cubicle at the hospital, scrolling through insurance claims, when I opened my personal email to check a confirmation code for a patient file. That was when I saw a subject line I did not recognize. Capital Ridge Platinum Card Statement. I stared at the screen, confused. I had never applied for a platinum card. I'd barely used credit at all. I clicked it, expecting spam. It was not spam. The statement showed a balance of $8,400. Charges from upscale restaurants, a downtown hotel, a jewelry store I had never been inside. All in my name. My hands went cold. I checked the account details again, hoping I had misread something. But the information was correct. My full name, my address, my social security number. I locked myself in my car during lunch and called the number on the statement. The customer service agent was calm, almost bored. According to her records, the account had been opened 6 months earlier in person at a local branch. The application included my signature and correct answers to all security questions. My mother's maiden name. The city where I was born. The name of my childhood dog. Only 2 people knew all of that. Me and my husband. I told her I had never opened the account. She explained the next steps slowly, carefully. To dispute the charges, I would need to file a police report for identity theft. I sat there gripping my steering wheel, watching hospital staff walk past my car, laughing, carrying coffee, living normal lives. Something inside me shifted. This was not carelessness. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake. This was betrayal wearing a very calm face. And I was still married to the man who had done it. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was still sitting in my car. It was a text from my father. Breakfast tomorrow, 7 a.m., Pete's Diner. We need to talk about something important. I frowned at the screen. Breakfast with my dad was usually Saturdays. It was our tradition. Tomorrow was Tuesday, and important was not a word my father used lightly. I typed back, "Is everything okay?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Everything's fine. Just don't tell Evan. I'll explain in person." That part made my stomach tighten. My father, Thomas Reed, was 72 years old and still working as a union electrician. He fixed wiring in old buildings, climbed ladders he had no business climbing anymore, and refused to retire because, as he liked to say, sitting still was how people died. After my mother passed away when I was 16, he became my anchor. Quiet, practical, steady. He never interfered in my marriage, never criticized Evan directly, but I knew he worried. That night, Evan came home late again. I told him I had breakfast plans with my dad in the morning. He barely looked up from his phone. "That's fine," he said. "I've got meetings anyway." The next morning, Pete's Diner smelled like burnt coffee and buttered toast. The same red vinyl booths. The same waitress who had known me since high school. My father was already seated when I arrived. He looked tired, not sick, just heavier somehow. We ordered. Then he slid a business card across the table toward me. "Margaret Collins, estate attorney." I stared at it. "Dad, what is this?" He took a breath, slow and measured. "I've been putting things off. Paperwork, planning, I don't want to anymore." I tried to laugh it off. "You're not dying." He met my eyes. "No, but I'm not stupid either." Then he said the words that stayed with me. "Rachel, trust me, and whatever happens next, remember this. I have always been protecting you." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I just knew my father was afraid, and that he was moving faster than I had ever seen him move before. Margaret Collins's office was 10 minutes from the hospital and a world away from my normal life. Dark wood furniture, tall shelves filled with law books, the kind of quiet that made you lower your voice without realizing it. Margaret was in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed, calm, and direct. She closed the conference room door and did not waste time with small talk. "Your father called me last night," she said. "He told me the situation was urgent." My chest tightened. "Is my dad sick?" She shook her head. "Not in the way you mean, but he is concerned. Very concerned." She opened a thick folder and began laying documents across the table. Property deeds. Bank statements. Trust paperwork. "Rachel," she said gently, "your father owns 10 rental properties across 3 counties. He has been acquiring them quietly for more than 30 years. I stared at her. "That's not possible. My dad is an electrician." "Yes," she said, "and a very disciplined one. He invested consistently, lived modestly, never took on unnecessary debt." She explained slowly, using plain language. The properties generated steady income. They were fully paid off. They were intentionally kept out of sight. Then she showed me the trust documents. "Your father created an irrevocable trust naming you as the sole beneficiary. Everything transfers directly to you. The trust specifically excludes any spousal claims regardless of marital status." I struggled to breathe. "Why now?" I asked. "Why this week?" Margaret folded her hands. "Because your father believes your husband is going to make a move. Soon. And he wants you protected before that happens." She slid a final document toward me. "These papers transfer control immediately. Once signed, there is no delay, no probate exposure, no opportunity for anyone to interfere." I thought about the credit card, the lies, the way Evan avoided eye contact when I asked direct questions. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. I signed. Margaret nodded once. "Good." Then her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed. "Rachel," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Your father was admitted to the hospital early this morning. Massive heart attack. They did everything they could." The room seemed to tilt. I did not cry, not yet. I had just signed documents that changed my entire future. And my father was already gone. Everything he had done in the last 24 hours suddenly made sense. He knew. And he moved fast because he was running out of time, I left Margaret Collins's office in a haze. The world outside looked exactly the same. Cars moved. People crossed the street. A coffee shop buzzed on the corner. It felt wrong that everything kept going when my father had just stopped. I drove straight to the hospital. They took me to a small room with beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. A doctor explained what happened in careful professional sentences. Massive heart attack, sudden, no pain, no warning signs anyone could have acted on. I nodded like I understood, even though nothing made sense. My father had been eating eggs and toast with me less than 2 hours earlier. He had smiled. He had warned me. He had protected me. And now he was gone. I signed the release forms with the same hand that had signed trust documents that morning. My name looked unfamiliar on the page, like it belonged to someone else. There was no time to sit with the grief. Calls had to be made. Arrangements had to be handled. The funeral director needed decisions I did not feel qualified to make. Flowers or donations. Open casket or closed. Thursday or Friday service. I chose everything quickly because standing still hurt more. That night, I went back to the rental house I shared with Evan. He was not there. I stood in the kitchen staring at the counter where unpaid bills were stacked. Past due notices. Final warnings. Things Evan had promised to handle. I did not cry then either. I felt empty. Hollow, like something essential had been removed and replaced with nothing. By morning, my father would be in a casket. By afternoon, people would be shaking my hand and telling me how sorry they were. And somewhere inside all of that, my husband was already planning his next move. What he did not know was that my father had already beaten him to it. The clock had started. And every second that passed was working against Evan, not me. The day of my father's funeral arrived too quickly. The church filled slowly with people I barely recognized at first, men my father had worked with, neighbors, old friends, people who had known him in ways I never fully understood until that moment. They shook my hand, hugged me gently, told me how much my father had helped them over the years, how dependable he was, how kind, how he always showed up. I stood beside the casket, dressed in black, moving on instinct alone. Evan arrived 10 minutes before the service started. He wore a new suit, dark, perfectly pressed, expensive. I noticed it immediately because I knew he had never had the money for it. He kissed my cheek like a performance, asked if I was okay, did not ask about the arrangements, did not mention my father. During the service, he kept checking his phone. When the final hymn ended, people began moving toward the reception hall downstairs. Casseroles, coffee, folding tables, the kind of gathering my father would have preferred. Simple, practical. That was when Evan touched my elbow. "Can we talk for a minute?" he said. A man stood beside him, late 40s, confident posture, leather folder tucked under his arm. "This is my attorney," Evan said calmly, "Derek Lawson." I felt my stomach drop. He guided me into a small classroom off the main hallway. Children's drawings lined the walls. Crayons taped to construction paper. Bright colors that did not belong in a moment like this. Derek closed the door. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, "I represent your husband in a personal legal matter. Given the circumstances and the pending estate issues, we felt it was appropriate to handle this today." He laid the papers on a child-sized table. "Divorce documents." I stared at them, unable to speak. "You are serving me divorce papers at my father's funeral," I finally said. Evan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Rachel, I know this is hard, but your dad would want you to do the right thing. He was practical. He would not want a drawn-out fight." Through the small window in the door, I could see faces gathering. My aunt, one of my father's co-workers, people noticing something was wrong. "If you sign today," Evan continued, "we keep this simple, uncontested, clean, no drama. We split everything fairly and move on. And if I don't, I don't." Derek answered that one. "Then it becomes complicated, expensive, assets get frozen, lawyers get involved. Your father's estate gets tied up for years." They were using my grief as leverage. They were counting on my exhaustion, my shock, my need to disappear rather than fight in public. I thought of the law office that morning, of my father's voice, of the papers already signed. My hands were shaking when I picked up the pen. Okay, I said quietly. Where do I sign? Relief crossed Evan's face before he could hide it. I signed every page, and the trap closed without a sound. Evan left the classroom lighter than he entered it. I could see it in his shoulders, in the way he straightened his tie, in the small satisfied breath he took as we walked back into the reception hall. To him this was over, a necessary inconvenience handled efficiently. He squeezed my hand once, like a manager congratulating an employee for being cooperative. You did the right thing, he said. This will be better for both of us. Then he released my hand and went straight to his friends. I watched from across the room as he laughed quietly, checked his phone, nodded to messages I could not see. He looked calm, confident, free. He stayed less than an hour. Long enough to be seen, long enough to perform grief, long enough to make sure the papers were signed. Before he left, he leaned in and kissed my forehead. I'll call you later, he said. We should talk about next steps, the estate, the assets. We'll need to be organized. Assets. That word followed me for the rest of the afternoon. I stayed until the last guest left. I helped stack chairs. I wiped tables. I accepted hugs from people who loved my father and meant well. No one asked where Evan was. No one asked why my eyes looked empty. That night, I did not go home. I checked into a small hotel near the interstate under my maiden name, paid cash, turned my phone face down on the nightstand. When I finally looked at it, there were 7 missed calls from Evan. 2 voicemails. The first was calm. Call me when you're ready. We need to talk logistics. The second was sharper. Rachel, this doesn't have to get messy. Call me back. I stared at the ceiling and felt nothing. Evan believed the hardest part was over. He believed I had folded. He believed he had won. By the next afternoon, he would learn how wrong he was. The call came the next morning while I was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at nothing. It was Margaret Collins. I answered without saying hello. They've filed, she said. Exactly as we expected. My chest tightened anyway. Filed what? Your husband's attorney submitted the divorce petition first thing this morning. Uncontested. He is requesting immediate disclosure of marital assets, including anything related to your father's estate. There it was. The move Evan thought would secure his future. Margaret's voice remained calm. His attorney called my office about 20 minutes ago. He was very confident. What did he say? He asked for full documentation on all properties formerly owned by Thomas Reed. He said, and I quote, that inheritances received during marriage are subject to division. I closed my eyes. And what did you say? I told him the truth. She paused just long enough for it to land. I told him those properties are not marital assets. They are held in an irrevocable trust established prior to your father's death. Your husband has no legal claim to the income, the properties, or the appreciation. None. There was silence on the line. Then Margaret added, almost gently. I could hear him breathing. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he asked me to repeat myself. Did he argue? Yes, he accused me of backdating documents, of manipulating your father, of committing fraud. And I told him the trust was notarized, witnessed, recorded, and filed before your father passed away. I also informed him that any further accusations should be directed through proper legal channels. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. What happened after that? He ended the call abruptly. Margaret exhaled. Rachel, this is the moment where things change. He now understands that he has nothing to leverage. No money, no control, no access. I stared at the plain hotel carpet beneath my feet. And Evan. Margaret did not hesitate. Evan is panicking. When people like him lose the illusion of control, they don't go quietly. She was right. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Evan. I didn't answer. For the first time in years, his urgency was no longer my problem. The power had shifted, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. Evan called 12 times that day. I did not answer any of them. The messages shifted quickly. Confusion turned into anger. Anger turned into bargaining. This doesn't make sense. Your lawyer is lying to you. We can fix this if you just talk to me. By late afternoon, the tone changed again. Rachel, please, we don't need to do this the hard way. I listened to the last voicemail once, then deleted it. Margaret was right. When control disappears, panic fills the space it leaves behind. That evening, I met Margaret in her office. She had already prepared everything. Timelines, documentation, copies of the credit card statements I had discovered, records showing accounts opened in my name without my consent. We're not doing anything aggressive, she said. We're simply responding to facts. That mattered to me. I was not trying to punish Evan. I was not trying to humiliate him. I was not seeking revenge. I was telling the truth. Margaret explained the next steps clearly. The fraudulent accounts would be reported. The divorce would proceed without asset division. Any attempt by Evan to interfere with the trust would be blocked immediately. He created this situation himself, she said. You're just no longer protecting him from it. That sentence stayed with me. For years I had softened consequences, covered gaps, made excuses, absorbed stress so Evan didn't have to. I thought that was love. Now I understood what it really was. Protection without accountability is not love. It is erasure. Evan texted one final message that night. You're really going to do this? I didn't reply. Not because I was being cold. Not because I was trying to hurt him. But because for the first time I was choosing not to disappear so someone else could feel powerful. What followed was not revenge. It was consequence. And there is a difference. In the quiet that followed, my father's presence became louder than it had ever been. I spent the next few days going through his things slowly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand the man I had just lost, the man who had moved so carefully, so deliberately in his final days. My father did not leave me instructions about money. He left me examples. Every folder in his desk was labeled, every receipt filed, every decision documented. He didn't trust hope. He trusted preparation. Margaret explained it to me one afternoon in a way that finally made sense. Your father didn't try to fight your husband. He didn't argue. He didn't warn him. He outplanned him. That was who my father was. He believed security was built quietly, over time. That love meant protection, not control. That the best defense wasn't confrontation but structure. I found a note he had written months earlier tucked inside a folder of property records. Make it simple, make it clean, don't leave her exposed. He had never raised his voice about Evan, never demanded I leave, never told me what to do with my marriage. He just made sure that when the truth surfaced I wouldn't be destroyed by it. That was the inheritance. Not the properties. And not the income. Not the numbers on paper. It was the freedom to choose without fear. Evan thought he was taking advantage of my grief. What he didn't understand was that my father had spent decades teaching me, without words, how to survive moments exactly like this. He didn't leave me anger. He didn't leave me revenge. He left me leverage, clarity, and a way forward. And once I saw that clearly, there was no going back. The divorce was finalized quietly a few weeks later. No courtroom drama, no long arguments, no public statements. Evan walked away with exactly what he had earned. Nothing. I stayed in the hotel for a while after everything ended, not because I was hiding but because I needed space to understand who I was without constantly managing someone else's chaos. Grief doesn't disappear when justice arrives, it just becomes clearer. I missed my father every day. I missed his steady voice, his practical advice, his ability to see danger before it arrived. But I also felt something new growing underneath the sadness. Strength. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that comes from knowing you can stand on your own without apologizing for it. Here is what I learned. Love should never require you to be blind. Marriage should never require you to be powerless. And grief should never be used as leverage. If someone pressures you to sign something when you are vulnerable, stop. If someone controls the money but avoids responsibility, pay attention. If something feels wrong, it usually is. My father did not teach me how to fight. He taught me how to prepare. And that made all the difference. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Subscribe to The Art of Revenge for more stories about clarity, boundaries, and quiet justice. Some endings are not about destruction. They are about becoming free.